Good afternoon and welcome to The Breakdown, an ACLU of Florida live video chat series where we break down the details of cases filed by the ACLU. My name is Baylor Johnson. I'm the Director of Communications here at the ACLU of Florida. Today we are talking about Stone versus City of Fort Lauderdale, a lawsuit filed by the ACLU of Florida and the Southern Legal Counsel this June on behalf of 16 people whose personal property was destroyed in a raid on a homeless encampment in downtown Fort Lauderdale by Fort Lauderdale police officers. I'm joined today by the two lead attorneys in the case. Jackie Azis is a staff attorney for criminal justice issues here at the ACLU of Florida, and Kirsten is the litigation director at the Southern Legal Counsel. So this is a live discussion. If you have questions for the panelists, please type them into the comments of the live stream, and we'll try to get to them at the end of the presentation. Before we get into a conversation about this case, I wanted to give Kirsten an opportunity to talk a little bit about the Southern Legal Counsel. This is obviously on the ACLU of Florida Facebook page. People are pretty familiar with us, but talk a little bit about your organization, if you would.
Yeah, so Southern Legal Counsel is a nonprofit public interest law firm that works statewide in Florida. We're based out of Gainesville, and we focus on making a big impact by representing individuals and groups who wouldn't have access to the justice system, and we're trying to fix the underlying problems, not just for them, but for all people similarly situated. So we do a lot of different areas, including civil rights, constitutional rights, particularly issues related to criminalization of homelessness, disability rights, and education law.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, and thanks again to both our panelists for being here. So, as I said, today we're talking a little bit about the lawsuit we filed following a raid on a homeless encampment in downtown Fort Lauderdale. So what exactly happened in Stranahan Park on May 19th? What went down?
Right, so Stranahan Park is this area in downtown Fort Lauderdale where individuals who are homeless have been residing. Essentially, it's in between Stranahan Park and the public library in downtown. And on May 19th, what happened is the city did essentially what we're calling a raid on this encampment. And what that means is they came in without any warning or notice, and to the approximately 40 individuals who were living in the downtown encampment, they told these individuals, you have a few minutes to gather your belongings. And for those who were lucky enough to be there at the time of the raid, had just a few minutes to get their belongings and put them in these blue bins that the city later saved. Unfortunately, however, there were a lot of people who weren't there at the time that these city workers came in to clean up this area based on a Department of Health citation, which I'll explain more later. So they came in without any warning. They threw away people's belongings who were not there to put their items in blue bins. So what was the health citation that I talked about earlier? So you asked about May 19th, but this actually started a few days before. So on May 15th, Jerry Pryor, who works for the City of Fort Lauderdale as a homelessness intervention administrator, actually contacted the State of Florida Department to report that there were rats in this area. Now, an inspector from the State Department came and didn't find any rats, but gave approximately 1 month for the city to correct what they said was harborage for rats, meaning that there were tents there were boxes, things like that. But instead of taking the time that they were given, which was a month, to correct any problems that they may have had, within 3 days, which was May 19th, is when the city came in but gave no warning to the people who were actually living in that area and who were impacted by this raid. And so some people lost everything they owned, literally everything they owned, except the clothes on their backs that day.
Yeah, it's a pretty shocking story. I know a lot of folks have seen the video that we put together interviewing some of the people who were impacted by this raid. It's a really emotional story. So this happened in mid-May. How did this story then come to our attention? What happened between the raid and folks losing their belongings and our two organizations filing a lawsuit on these people's behalf?
Absolutely. Well, there were a lot of people who actually saw what was happening because it was done in broad daylight, and there were trucks that were brought out, dump trucks, lots of police enforcement, a bunch of homeless individuals who then became, I guess, who showed up and realized their belongings were lost. So it was widely known in the area because it was also well covered by the press and by people who were there. There were Facebook live streams of this going on, so there were plenty of witnesses. We're also lucky enough that there are some people who are homeless advocates within the area who reached out to us and told us this was happening. And in fact, an ACLU volunteer, someone knew it was going on as well. So we just heard about it from a lot of different people, and we joined together because this is the type of issue that both of our organizations work on and are very passionate about making sure never happens again.
Thanks. Again, if you're just joining us, this is The Breakdown with the ACLU of Florida, and we're here today talking about the lawsuit we filed a couple of months ago on behalf of 16 people who had their personal possessions seized and destroyed in a raid on a homeless encampment in downtown Fort Lauderdale. This is a live conversation, so we want your questions. Please type any questions you have for our panel of attorneys into the comments, and we'll get to them at the end of the stream. So who are some of these folks who are represented in the case? Like, what exactly, how did they come to be in a position where they lost all of their possessions in this raid, and what kinds of things were lost when it happened?
We are representing 16 individuals, as we said. 9 of them are women and 7 of them are men. And these are individuals who had their belongings completely destroyed by the city, meaning they were not kept in the blue bins that we talked about. Some of the items that were destroyed include medications, clothes that people use to go look for work, schooling supplies, eyeglasses, shoes, personal hygiene products, blankets, pillows, things they need for sleeping, tents, and lots of irreplaceable personal possessions and legal documents as well. So things like birth certificates, name change decrees, personal items such as family heirlooms or jewelry, and things that are just irreplaceable. So a little bit more about our plaintiffs, like you were asking. We have 9 women, 7 men. Some of them are in school, some of them are looking for jobs. A few have been homeless for years, some as few as just maybe 2 months when this happened. Many have just found themselves in an unfortunate situation and are trying their hardest to get out of it.
Yeah, it's a wide sort of swath of people who were impacted by this.
Absolutely.
So what exactly is it that we're suing for? I think a lot of folks are familiar with cases the ACLU brings where we're, trying to stop a bad policy from going into effect, trying to preempt something from hurting people. In this case, people were already hurt and we're suing on their behalf. So what exactly is it that we're trying to achieve through this lawsuit?
A couple of things. First, we are suing to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So the city, as Jackie was explaining earlier, they came in with no notice. It was and just showed up with dump trucks and threw people's belongings in the trash. And so we want to make sure that that never happens again. So that's the first piece. The second piece is we want the court to declare that what happened was unconstitutional. And the third thing is we're asking the court for damages on behalf of our clients. So money to compensate them for the loss of their belongings.
Okay, that's great. And where does the lawsuit then currently stand? So we filed in June. What has happened since then, and what's kind of the path forward at this point?
So we filed the complaint in June, and then the city filed its answer. And now we're at the point where we're just getting into the discovery phase of the case. So we get to get documents from the city and take depositions of witnesses. So we're kind of in the part of trying to prove our claims at this point.
All right. So again, just a reminder to folks who have been maybe joined the conversation late, this is the breakdown. It's a live video chat, and in this case we're talking about the lawsuit that the ACLU of Florida and the Southern Legal Counsel filed in June about a police raid on a homeless encampment in downtown Fort Lauderdale. If you have questions for the attorneys in the case, please type them into the chat and we'll try to answer them here in a little bit. But before we get to those questions, I wanted to ask, how does what happened in Fort Lauderdale fit into the broader landscape of what we're calling the criminalization of homelessness? You know, this wasn't an isolated incident. You mentioned that this is an issue, the criminalization of homelessness and the rights of homeless, that the Southern Legal Counsel works a lot on. How do we see that landscape looking in Florida today?
Yeah, so the criminalization of homelessness is a term that we broadly use to refer to policies and practices of cities to use their police powers. In this case, their police powers were used to seize and destroy property. In other cases, they might use their police powers to arrest people for engaging in basic life-sustaining activity in public, things that they need to do in order to survive because they have no other alternatives. Things like sleeping, sitting down, reclining, asking for money. All of those things in many cities across the state of Florida are a crime, not because they're harming anyone, but because cities are trying to respond to the visibility of homelessness in public space. And so they're doing so instead of addressing root causes of homelessness, like housing and other related services that people require. They're instead using the criminal justice system, using their police powers to really try to hide the problem rather than solve the problem.
So essentially what happened in Fort Lauderdale is reflective of the larger problem of cities and counties and communities attempting to address homelessness through the criminal justice system, through police activity, rather than trying to address the root problems. And the results, as we often see, and as we saw in this case, is violations of people's rights.
Exactly. Well said. Yes.
So again, this is a live conversation. We are looking forward to answering your questions. We got a couple of questions before the chat even started. And one question that people had was, what is happening in the park now? Are the people who were present, or who at least whose belongings were present on the day of the raid, where are they now, and have they been able to get any kind of recourse?
Some individuals, if you go to that area, you will see are still there because they have nowhere else to go. And so it's actually the area between Stranahan Park and the library is where individuals are staying and living now because they have no other options and nowhere to go. Now, maybe not everyone from before the raid has come back to it. Maybe some of them have been lucky enough to find housing or to be able to live with a family member, but it's still very much an area as it was before the raid for those who are homeless to gather and to be together for community.
And another question that was asked before the feed was one about whether we are aware of anything that the city has done in the time since the raid to address some of the underlying problems of homelessness in the community. Are we aware of anything that has changed with that regard?
I don't think we're aware of any positive steps that the city has taken in that regard to address root causes of homelessness. If anything, I think the city continues to pursue policies that are temporary in nature and not anything that's really going to address what really needs to happen to solve the problem.
All right. So we have a question from Casey on Facebook who wants to know what should I do if I see police or law enforcement destroying or seizing property in public spaces in the future?
Well, clearly we don't want anyone to intervene and get arrested. for obstruction. But as citizens, we have the right to observe. We have the right to film or take photographs. And we also have the ability to contact organizations like the ACLU or Southern Legal Counsel, preferably both of us, and we can join forces again to make sure this can't happen.
And I'll just add to that, that's exactly what happened in this case, is many citizens who just happened to be witnessing it reached out to us, and advocates in the area who are homeless advocates made sure to at least record it in some way, whether it was photos or video or taking notes about what happened and getting names.
Yeah, I think this is something that we at the ACLU say a lot, is that in situations involving interactions with police, even if you think that something is going sideways, that something seems amiss to you, to just be aware of the power dynamic in that situation. It's a lot harder to challenge a violation in the street when you're not the one in the position of power. The police officers are almost always going to be the ones in a position of power in a situation like that. So document what you can, record what you can, ask questions, get names, and then report what you have seen to organizations like ours so that we can do what we can in a venue where the power dynamic is a little more balanced. Now that's all of the questions that we have gotten so far on the chat. I'm going to go ahead then and wrap this up, but if you have any last second questions, type them into the chat and we'll try and answer them in the stream. But I want to thank for now our panelists for joining us today. Again, this is Jackie Azis, staff attorney for criminal justice issues here at the ACLU of Florida, and Kirsten Anderson, litigation director at the Southern Legal Counsel. I'm Baylor Johnson, Director of Communications here at the ACLU of Florida. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you for joining us on the live stream. And our next Facebook Live event is going to be part of our Woke Wednesday series with Engage Florida on fighting hate on campus. This Wednesday, August 9th at 6 p.m. Eastern. We hope you join us then. Thank you so much.